All right, so let's go around and be looking at Daylight Robbery, William III, and the window tax. Now, this is a subject that I've heard about the window tax, and it just sounds wild. I mean, taxing houses based on the windows that they have, or I believe it's what over eight, or like most houses had like 8 or 10 windows. Like I know the basics of everything, but the why, like that just seems so wild to me. So we're gonna take a look at this and see what it's got to say. That being said, let's get into it, shall we?
It was the early 1690s, and the king needed money. King William and Parliament had brought this problem on themselves. To gain popularity, they'd just got rid of a hated tax. Now he was short of cash. What to do? Every home had a hearth.
What taxes they get rid of? That because now having a even if it seems like a frivolous tax, something like a window tax, it's just wild to me still. But if you get rid of one tax, you got to have something to replace the money that's going into the treasury. Well, what tax was it? If it was an important one and a hated one, well, maybe not important, but a hated one, right?
And the English had been paying hearth taxes one way or another, usually to the church, since before the Norman invasion of 1066, when they were known as smoke farthings or fumage. But in 1662, hearth money became statute. Every home worth more than 20 shillings, about 5,000 US dollars in today's money, had to pay 1 shilling twice a year for every stove, hearth, or fireplace.
That's kind of crazy. Like, holy crap. So if you had a bigger home and you had two fireplaces, or a spot where you put your stove, where you cooked your food, and then a separate fire, and if you had more than that with a bigger house, Jesus Christ, dude, that could add up.
People who'd been out of the range of direct taxes suddenly found themselves liable. Even paupers were listed. Tax collectors were operating on commission and enforced their rights to the last farthing. They demanded entry into people's homes every 6 months to count their fireplaces, and so infringed on the Englishman's sacred privacy. Worse yet, the idea had come from France. The English hated it, and it was
Yeah,
a
I
huge
bet
source
so.
of grievance when the Glorious Revolution came in 1688. Here was a means to quickly ingratiate the new monarchs, William and Mary, with their people. They abolished hearth money to erect a lasting monument of their Majesty's goodness in every hearth in the kingdom. But it left a major problem. The Dutch were owed money for equipping William's invasion to overthrow the previous king, James II. There was conflict in Ireland and war on the continent, the 9 Years' War, to be paid for. There were allies of James II in Scotland to expel. And there was also the small matter of a currency crisis at home.
That's a lot of stuff adding up at once, and if they can get rid of it, it feels like a frivolous, like a petty tax, right? A hearth tax seems like a very petty tax, in my opinion. It, taxing a home based on the amount of hearths or fireplaces, stove type places in the house, just seems like there'd be better ways that you could take and extract tax money. Maybe the size of the house, the land is owned, like something of that nature. That's woo.
How to pay for it all. In 1696, a solution was found. Surprise, surprise, it came in the form of another tax, the duty on houses, light and windows, otherwise known as the window tax. Now, a collector could walk past somebody's house and count the number of windows from outside. He didn't have to venture in. No privacy was violated. No engagement with the taxpayer was required, nor any declaration on his part. You can't hide windows, so it was a hard tax to avoid. Thanks to hearth money, the infrastructure was already in place to collect the tax. It also seemed a fair tax. The more windows somebody had, the wealthier they were likely to be, and so the greater their ability to pay. Like so much permanent government legislation, window tax was introduced on a temporary basis. The amounts payable were low at first, starting with a flat rate of 2 shillings per house with up to 10 windows. But over the
2 windows are 2 shillings per house for over 10. Oh, that's okay. I mean, that you got a larger house like that. I'm pretty sure that it would be, you'd probably have more than one hearth in it. So probably have 3 or 4, which what that'd have been what, like, is a shilling per or 2 shillings per? That's what, 8, 6, 8 shillings. So two. Oh, okay, okay. I mean, that doesn't seem too bad. And it's just it as long as it just stays on houses with over 10 windows. Still kind of petty. Understandable though. Need income.
years, they crept up. Soon, rather than pay, people began blocking up their windows. By 1718, it was already noted that the tax wasn't raising as much revenue as hoped. The reaction was not to lower the tax, but to increase it. The result was even more extreme avoidance tactics. Homes were built with fewer windows. Some were built with windows already bricked up, thus giving the owner the option to knock through and glaze at a later stage if desired. In some cases, apartment buildings were constructed with entire floors of windowless bedrooms. At a time when electric, gas and oil lighting had not yet been invented, and light came from the smoky flames of tallow candles or rushlights, that's reeds dipped in fat, blocking out sunlight and fresh air was no small sacrifice.
That seems like it'd be a health hazard. Just a little bit. All the stale air and stuff like that. No sunlight, so yeah, seems like it'd be a little bit of a hazard.
A further absurd impost on light, as the medical journal The Lancet later called it, came in 1746, when the government of King George II introduced a tax on glass. Between them, the two taxes became a cause of deformity in building, according to John Stuart Mill, yet they guided architecture for 150 years, determining how the
Jesus
villages,
Christ.
towns and cities of Britain and France, which would have its own impôt sur les portes et fenêtres, would look, and in many places still look today. The thresholds, or notches as they were known, of the tax determined how many windows a building would have. Some aspirational villagers in Wiltshire even painted the exterior bricks of their homes in black and white to resemble the windows that were now missing. When the Prime Minister, William Pitt, tripled the tax in 1797, one carpenter reported to Parliament that a whole street had asked him to brick or board up their windows. The glass tax inhibited the
I mean, when you go from a nominal amount to triple the tax, so it seems kind of punitive in my opinion. I mean, I can understand the reason why people wouldn't want to take and build homes with windows in them. You don't want to first windows, now also glass tax. Like, so that's a double whammy of stuff. That's just, I bet those were high. Well, I was gonna say I bet they're high. The fact that people are building houses without windows in them, or few windows, is a testament to how unpopular something like that is. Jesus.
growth of an entire industry. Between 1801 and 1851, the United Kingdom population grew from 11 million to 27 million. London alone saw a 170% increase in its population, from 1
Good
million
Lord.
to 2.7 million. There was a building boom to accompany the extraordinary population growth. Yet, thanks to the tax, glass production levels remained largely unchanged over the period. Windows became a symbol of wealth, even in fiction. Elizabeth saw much to be pleased with, writes Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice, though she could not be in such raptures as Mr. Collins expected the scene to inspire, and was but slightly affected by his enumeration of the windows in front of the house, and his relation of what the glazing altogether had originally cost.
I'm sorry, but you've slightly fucked up if windows are a sign of wealth. Just throwing that out there like, holy hell. Because that means they've got the money to be frivolous. Like, that's just crazy, dude. That's insane. Like, it seems like there'd be other ways of bring in taxes, right? You would think at the very least there'd be different ways that aren't punitive and affect people in a way that alters architecture altogether. Like that's architecture. What the fuck? Architecture altogether. Because again, that has to be highly unhealthy, right? You don't have to take in just all that dank, stale air circulating about. You don't have any windows, so you can't take and get it circulated by opening the windows. God forbid there's a fire. How the fuck are you going to take like that's bro? And if something's to happen, you get all the you start a fire in your fireplace or something like that. Something happened, and you take and get the smoke coming back in. It's got nowhere to take and go. That's just woo. No bueno, no bueno.
Though the tax never made it to the USA, in 1798 fear of it sparked an entire rebellion, the Fries Rebellion. When assessors in Pennsylvania rode about surveying property for the direct house tax, German and Dutch settlers thought they were about to try and levy a window tax. They rose up in an armed revolt that spread across the state and took the federal troops of President John Adams the best part of 2 years to quash. Nor did the window tax prove progressive. A house of £10 rent in the country, wrote Adam Smith, may have more windows than a house of £500 rent in London. Yet the poorer country house owed more tax. Rural dwellers were hit hard, but it was the urban poor who suffered most. They lived in large tenement buildings, which, having many windows, proved heavily susceptible to the tax. Landlords, on whom the tax fell, simply boarded up the tenement windows to reduce costs. This led to the tax's most pernicious unintended consequence. It made people sick. The numerous epidemics of disease in cities during the Industrial Revolution, typhus, smallpox, and cholera in particular, were made worse by the cramped, damp, windowless dwellings. The Lancet called the tax a direct encouragement to disease. An official scientific inquiry concluded that the blocking up of the numerous windows caused by the anxiety of their owners to escape the payment of the tax has, in very many instances, greatly aggravated and has even been the primary cause of much sickness and mortality. Even so, the tax continued. By the 19th century, opposition to it was everywhere. The adage, free as air, has become obsolete, fumed Charles Dickens. Neither air nor light have been free since the imposition of the window tax. Campaigning against it went on for decades. Pamphlets were handed out, songs were sung, speeches were made. In 1840,
Well, you've done messed up if you've got songs against your tax. Just say it. Like that's yo, great God.
shortly after the reintroduction of income tax, Sir Robert Peel repealed glass taxes. But the window tax remained. Only in 1850 was a motion finally put before Parliament to repeal it. Legend has it that MPs cried, "Daylight Robbery," when the matter was debated. The idiom has lived on as an expression for outrageous charging. The motion, however, failed to pass. Only after another national campaign was the tax finally repealed in 1851. France would not repeal its version for another 75 years.
Jesus.
The window tax was just one tax, and in the context of history, not a particularly long-lived one. But it's a great example of how a tax comes into being and the consequences that follow. In its evolution, we see the typical life cycle of a tax. It is enacted at a time of need, usually to fund some kind of war. It is presented as temporary, but becomes permanent. The amount payable is low.
Well, that's what happens with government. We need this to take and do this. Once we're done with this, we're done with that. Yeah, well, they get the tax. They get finished with the war or project or whatever they're working on, and the tax stays around after it's over with. And who suffers? Everybody but the fucking politicians. Lovely.
Low at first, but increases over time. It violates basic freedoms, in this case the right to light and fresh air. Many go to great lengths to avoid paying it, and thus it distorts how people behave and the decisions they make. There are all sorts of unintended consequences which get worse as the tax matures. Much of the money raised is wasted or spent in a way with which the taxpayer does not agree. Finally, people have had enough, and there is some kind of movement, a campaign, a protest, even a revolution to get rid of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's 100% on point with that. It's been repeated over and over and over through time, especially. Bro, it's just insane some of the stuff that they do taxes on, take and raise money, whether it be for war or improvements to the country, whether it's infrastructure or what have you. And it's not supposed to take and be progressive in any way, so you're not supposed to see any kind of raises in it or anything of that nature, but inevitably it stays around. And it gets to a point of being overbearing because you're already, the way the way economies work. If there's everything's just going to take and go up over time regardless of how much you're making. So it's just becomes unbearable at a point. That's window tax is still just wild to me. Like, of all the things you could tax, holy crap.
Which government is slow and reluctant to do. It is too simplistic to say the window tax was good or bad. It worked well for a while, then it didn't. The money raised helped pay, among other things, for the essential defense of the nation. At its heart is the moral dilemma of so many taxes. On the one hand, it was an invasion of private property rights with grave unintended consequences. On the other, it was the most practical solution at the time to pay for what some would deem to be the vital workings of government. We can see why Winston Churchill, among many others, described taxes as a necessary evil.
They are, but you don't take and do a tax and that's doing a tax that you wind up keeping around that winds up becoming progressive in nature, as inevitably 90% of taxes that are ever passed by any government become, unless you've got means for an offset of that benefits your citizens, you're going to wind up with hell down the road. Now, in this instance, took a bit, but still, it's just people had to be much poorer because of it.
Big question is, how much evil is necessary?
Y'all go check this channel out. Watch, give some love to the original video. Very much so. Good video. Eudaimonia. It's from 4 years ago. It's only got 10. That's criminally low. 10,000 views. It's pretty, and it's a niche type subject, right? On a type of tax. It was a very unpopular tax, but only 10,000 views on something like that. Pretty interesting. It's a well done video in my opinion. Should have way more views. Y'all take and show that channel some love. Show the video some love. Like this right here it's crazy. Having a hearth tax of 2 shillings twice a year, nonetheless, right? Per hearth or fireplace or stove within the house. That's wow. If it's one thing if you've got money, but even having to take and dole out extra money, but just because you got a fireplace or 2 in your house it's kind of crazy, to be honest with you. So replacing that with something like a window tax, and it just being for basically houses with over 10 windows. Later on, including a glass tax, like nobody's going to want to build any windows or have any glass, on the outside of the house, like of any kind. That's still just as such a wild thing to take and tax. I get it. You need money. You got to have revenue coming in to take and pay for the functions of government and stuff like that. But it seems like there's different ways that could have been gone about. Took on what 200 years for almost 200 years for it to take and go by the wayside. But at the same point in time, I mean, holy crap. And of course, looking at some of this just through modern lenses, like as soon as they started talking about bricking up the windows. It's like, bro, there's all kind of sickness going to happen because of that. All that stale air. If somebody gets sick, everybody's getting sick. So then they talking about typhus and smallpox and cholera. Yeah, checks out. Like, what do you expect? You got no way to take and air everything out. Let some moving air, air circulate through the house, and everybody's in the same sickly air. It's just it breeds germs and nastiness and sickness. So, oh Lord have mercy. That's not to mention if there's a fire that happens, like you can only basically get out by your doors. That's not safe in and of itself either. I get the reason why people did it though, and the fact that it changed architecture like that. Jesus. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves. Peace.